Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jerad and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We're here with Tom Spier in the studio as well. Welcome back, Tom.
Hello, guys.
Always good to see you. Welcome to the studio.
Good to see you. Thank you.
And
swooping in.
Why are you here? In the nicest possible way.
Apparently, somebody wanted to talk about reinsurance conferences. You don't see me between September and Christmas.
Yeah.
That's where I am.
We needed a BA triple gold status member to talk us through this process.
Yeah, because it's, albeit absolutely sweltering hot today in London, we are sort of very quickly approaching like conference season, which is quite an extended period of time over a couple months as we come out of the summer. We'll sort of run through, trying to see if we could name them all chronologically before this podcast. We might need to reference a calendar, but run us through the agenda of conference season, and we'll talk about kind of what they are, why they're there, the purpose of them is.
So the first is Monte Carlo Rendezvous. That tends to be the big European one to kick things off.
Which we'll both be there for.
Which we will both be there for.
Jared's selfishly getting married.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't even factor in Monte Carlo Rendezvous. But also podcasting there again this year, which will be exciting.
Podcasting.
So look for more
from
yacht,
super yacht.
from yacht-related podcasting. So come say hi if you're planning to be in Monte Carlo.
Please do. Please do. After that, there's a Deloitte reinsurance conference in London the week after Monte Carlo. So everybody should be coming back feeling refreshed. It's mainly around kind of seeded reoperations.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a different agenda.
And you're a keynote speaker from what I remember as well.
Yeah, I think everybody who's speaking is a keynote. I don't want to big that up too much. But no, we've been invited to come on with a client, actually, with Hiscox, and talk through kind of how we've helped them over the last couple of years.
Nice.
Hopefully share some learnings there.
Awesome.
Nice. And after we get out of PwC, where do we go next?
Or Deloitte, in fact.
Deloitte.
Because we do have some secret plans in Monte Carlo as well.
Oh, that's right.
Wait, watch this space.
To be announced. So after that is the APCIA conference, which is in Chicago this year. It tends to be the American version of a Baden-Baden or a Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
So most of the big North American P&C carriers represented there.
I think they should have done it somewhere with an F1 track, though. Like the vibe in Monte Carlo is just a different vibe because it has this history of, you've got the James Bond references, you got the famous Formula One races. Like Chicago just feels it's a nice, big U.S. city, but doesn't have the sort of allure of Monte Carlo from the sex appeal.
Yeah, so APCIA moves around. So it's in a different location every year. And we've only been going for a couple of years. So I think the first one that we went to was Seattle, and then Boston, and now Chicago.
Yeah.
But when you look at the roster of previous locations, there have been some absolutely beautiful Rocky Mountain locations or beach resorts down in southern Florida, and kind of thinking, what have we done to deserve Chicago in mid-October?
Yeah, starting to get crisp. Yeah,
your fiance and soon-to-be in-laws are all from Chicago. I hope they don't listen to this episode.
No, I know, that's goodbye, wedding.
If you are listening, your city is cold in the winter,
and very windy. No, perfect. And then we start moving back to Europe. Then after that, isn't it? It's
so Baden-Baden's a couple of weeks after that.
Yeah,
which is. Tends to be where the real business is done. I think Monte Carlo is, a lot of aspirational, strategic chats, and suddenly I think everybody has a better idea as to how the renewal season is going to pan out.
I promised quite a lot of people that I would speak to them in German this year at the conference last year, so that's going to be interesting.
German stroke French, wasn't it?
German and French, I think I might have promised.
Yeah, you've made several sets of promises there.
Yeah. Pressure's on.
Well, this can only go one way.
I'm mainly just going to watch.
Yeah.
To be honest. Yes, that's always a good one. That's always really good for us. We've been really lucky last few years that people have been really generous with their time, and we've been able to have some really productive conversations around how to move things forward. We may be podcasting there again as well. We
had to figure it out.
hosted a podcast last year in front of Leo's.
Getting some thumbs up from the marketing department lurking behind the scenes.
Bar. So we plan to be there again for an evening of podcasting where things become very easily releasable with almost no editing at the start of the evening, and then at the end many more approvals are required.
Yeah, sadly, at the Spa with Supercede wasn't approved.
No.
No, I think clothes are some of the spas there. So.
No, this is true. We could do the first non-video version of the podcast, but it would lose some allure.
Yeah. And then only one left then before the end of the year. Cirque.
Yeah, so Cirque is first week in November.
Yep.
So that's big one in Singapore for the Asia Pacific region mostly. You do see a lot of kind of super regional carriers there as well. So it's a big one for Indian cedents, Australian cedents, as well as kind of Southeast Asia and Greater China.
Yeah.
That's just getting bigger and bigger as an event. And so I think last year was like nearly double the size of the year before. And it just continues to get bigger. Thankfully, it's held at the Marina Bay Sands conference complex, which it takes up like 30% of it at the moment, and it's by far the biggest conference in terms of attendees of the year. So,
but we've sort of laid the sort of calendar out now, but it's sort of worth spending some time talking about, like, why do we do this? What is the purpose of us like all descending into these like hubs and sort of doing this year over year, in addition to BA status and everyone else's travel plans? But what is like, why do we do this as an industry? What is the driver of these sort of conference schedules?
So the industry is a face-to-face industry, and I think it comes from a lot of the great traditions in London of subscription markets getting together and sharing information on risks that they share, and building personal relationships that go a lot deeper than kind of the contractual terms of a reinsurance contract. Like propensity to pay a claim is like
quite important,
very important. A lot of that is obviously written down in a contract, but reinsurance contract wording is kind of a mix of art and science in itself, and so the only way you can be sure is by having lots and lots of conversations and really, really good long-lasting relationships between markets and cedents and brokers, and so that's the reason why it's important that people get together as the markets become global and moved outside of just London and a few other places. It's important that people have these times in the year that they can get together.
And I guess we found almost each of the conferences has its own kind of like purpose in a way, like different flavors as you go through. Like we've certainly talked in the past about, you mentioned coming in Baden-Baden's where business actually gets done. Negotiating can actually happen there. Monte Carlo is very different though, isn't it? Much more of a...
Yeah, so there were, going back, historical reasons why the conferences were timed where they were. I'm not sure how accurately that follows the renewal pattern now, for instance. So you'd be looking at firm order terms being issued, in the week leading up to Baden-Baden normally. So that you can kind of get things bottomed out by there. I think in recent years, firm order terms is actually a November, December thing. So
it's all that data.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be. It's a congested end of the year for sure, much more so than it was traditionally when there wasn't tons of data to go through, and these things were done more on a relationship basis.
Yeah,
absolutely.
but that subscription market sentiment is really important, especially when you look at the cadence there, where Monte Carlo is so much about trying to get like everyone's assessment of what the market conditions are. Like everyone's having that conversation around the broader prevailing conditions that we're playing within. What are sort of developments from the storm season that we were coming out of? Like all of these things are sort of bottoming out, and we're then going, okay, here's what we're sort of collectively seeing, and then also where the brokers and the reinsurers are sort of pushing their major narratives to the market before having to have like the contracts in front of them. They're sort of trying to level set expectations in some way.
That's certainly the traditional purpose of having that conference there. But there are some big hurricanes happening in mid-September now. Hurricane season is much longer.
Yeah.
Again, you've probably only just received data packs. And so you're just seeing portfolio development from the previous year. A lot of the ratings agencies, the big consultancies are there and have a viewpoint on how the renewal season is developing. But I think even the big brokers are still struggling at that point. So it's become like a place where very, very senior people within the industry, CEOs of the top 4 or 5 brokers, and major industry underwriters can start to create a narrative around how they want people to behave leading up to the renewal season, because it's probably still a bit early for its traditional place.
Which presents us kind of an interesting area to sort of poke into, is like, how will these conferences evolve over time? If we see the impacts of global warming and storm seasons getting longer, and you see our ability to respond to data and price in capital maybe more effectively or differently in a environment where we can sort of leverage that, like if interest rates, for example, shift, like the market is responding to that more quickly than it would have done previously. How will we think about the role these conferences will play, where they are positioned? Will they continue in the sort of structured cadence that they've always had, or do you see an evolution there that might begin to spin out as we respond to risks and work in an environment of risk in a different way?
Well, some of those factors create an argument that the conference should be later, and some of them create an argument that the conference should be earlier. I think overall, I'm going to be ambitious and say that over time, the conferences where the conferences will kind of return to their more traditional roles, and they're in the current sets of timing that there are. I believe, I'm biased, but I believe there is a movement towards really arresting the enormous amount of time it takes to tackle data in a reinsurance submission. Currently, it's over 50% of the entire placement journey is just done in data cleansing, validation, and presentation. That is far too much by anybody's standards. I think that the industry is beginning to realize that that's a massive problem. And actually, it's one of the easiest ways to reduce the total amount of economic burden and increase the amount of efficiency there is in the placement process, will be to tackle this process that takes over half the time now. And I think over time that will begin to get arrested, obviously through tools like Supercede, but also other process enhancements and really a willingness of the entire industry to get their arms around this and tackle it. And then we can get back to knowing what we're talking about in Monte Carlo, and perhaps having firm order terms in market in October when we meet in Baden-Baden again.
And actually having numbers that line up with each other and being able to sit down with something. I think a lot of the posturing you see at Monte Carlo, as you say, is because there's not really anything solid to talk about, right? Here is a sweeping statement of appetite, or some general guesses at market conditions that sound credible, but there's not really anything.
And it's some of it's so obvious when it comes out. It's like I always remember there was when England weren't expected to get to semi-finals and finals of football competitions. Wayne Rooney came out and he said, oh, I'm going to score in the next game. You think, well, that is your job, mate. You're paid quite a lot of money to score goals. So coming out and making a statement like that doesn't, and it's the same. I think the message from some of the big brokers last year was, well, we're going to try really hard to get our clients the best price we possibly can. Like, that's
journalists feverishly typing that down.
That's
right?
kind of the minimum expectation. I think, hopefully we'll get into a place where more substantive, informed arguments and interesting information can come out of them.
Yeah. Well, I think we've always said where the role of the broker will continue to evolve towards is being able to leverage better data and to deliver like interesting and creative ways to solve complex client challenges, and using those markets as a way to sort of present, we're looking at this new style of structure, and running around the market, having all those conversations in that exploratory stage. Maybe it might be things where, I think you saw this before in conferences, where they tee up those conversations because they can have them all at once over the course of a few days, with the intention of over the next year seeing how those things play out, right? You're looking at, as we've looked at new structures that got to emerge out, like top and drops and cascading structures and these types of things, it's very hard to like drop that on the market in one renewal season. So you begin to open up those conversations a couple of times, and then by that second or third year, it's like, oh, there's actually, the appetite is there, the ability to understand the pricing of that is now there. But like, it's almost using the conferences as a way to introduce those solutions for clients in a really effective way as well. So I think you begin to see how the brokers maximize their value to do something creative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think like most recent example of that is probably the cyber cat bonds that were coming through. But yeah, conversations were happening around those 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this hangs on how quickly people can do analysis of options, right? To some extent, you get people probably now on a cadence of like, by the next conference, can you have a look at this idea we've had, right? Somebody will say, what if we took away this layer, or can you as if the portfolio in case of this exclusion, or can you, chop and change it in a different way and put, that part of casualty into its own program, or bring it all together into a sort of wider composite program. And that's like maybe a suggestion at Monte Carlo that by Baden-Baden, we've been able to have a little bit of a look at, if you're lucky, and then maybe sign it off in SIRC. You could imagine that being like a live conversation, like, oh, what happens if we as if it? Oh, that's what happens.
Yeah.
In a much more digital world, you'd be able to at least do that overnight or just after the meeting and be like, met someone for breakfast at Baden last night. They suggested this. I've had a look at it that same day. And so now we're going to chat about it over drinks and Leos. Yeah. Rather than we'll chat about it when we see them in a month's time. But we can hope.
We can hope. There was always a lot of chatter, especially a couple of years ago during COVID, around sort of moving, like, would attendance begin to drop for these things? Would they move towards a hybrid model or similar? We've seen a lot of like uptake and like return to the conferences. As you said, Cirque is as big as it's ever been. But we've also seen some larger firms like reducing the number of people they send out to the conferences, or sort of tightening up the attendee lists. What are your thoughts around how that plays out over the coming years, as we especially become more aware of our footprints and not traveling as much, or if we don't need to? Do you see the industry sort of continuing to double down then and sort of returning to pre-pandemic standards of attendance?
I think overall the attendances have gone up and continue to increase. There's a lot more brokers than there used to be. That's indisputable. So I think that's what's driving a lot of it. The companies that we've seen attending less tend to be kind of the big global insurers. And they're the kinds of companies where brokers will come and see them, or reinsurers will agree to a special one-on-one meeting with them because they're a really important, really large client. I think for the bulk of medium-sized P&C insurance companies, this is the logical place to come and meet all of the markets that you want to do business with. Same thing outside. I think the kind of reduction in attendance really has been driven by the big underwriting companies, Swiss Re, Munich Re, Hanover Re, and a few others, and they've really had to justify why they're going to be in attendance. But I think that's been driven through them making adjustments in the way they handle client relationships. I think there's been a real professionalization amongst those companies, that they need to treat clients in the way that all other big companies treat clients. They shouldn't have a single underwriter writing a single line of business, having a relationship with a single person at an insurance company, and that being siloed and isolated. They have a much more structured method using kind of account managers, strategic account relationship people that can now come in and really get their arms around, this is Swiss Re's relationship with AIG, for example. And these are all of the lines of business that we write with them. These are all the things that we trade off against each other in our relationship with them. And here are all the other ways that we're looking to help with them with, innovation or climate change management or, any of the various initiatives that kind of big reinsurers put a lot of investment into learning about.
Yeah, it's I think a deeper conversation for a whole other podcast, but I think you're seeing that evolution happen on the broker side as well, where our industry has always been incredibly entrepreneurial, and what that's always driven is a lot of results-driven producers, both as underwriters or brokers, running around independently on behalf of clients and trying to drive revenues for their organization, but ineffective as like a group level or company-wide way to manage that account or similar. And now most of the big firms are looking, as you say, sort of centralize that data, understand the holistic relationship with a client and try to deliver way more value. And I think you'll see that is in the conferences as well, where those things spin up more, right? People are going into those conversations with a better understanding of, with us and this underwriter or us and this broker, what are we doing across the board, and how do we most effectively leverage the time we have in person during these meetings to have the catch-ups and the conversations with our most sort of core, largest partners, such that we can achieve the objectives we've set out as an insurer.
I don't want to keep going back to this as a broken record, but you only achieve those strong relationships that you can look at holistically if you can handle the information and the data that's coming in about what deals are you doing, when are they done, how are they benchmarked, how do we compare one client with another client in a consistent way. As companies get better at doing that, it's going to be much easier to take better care of their clients in the way that we're seeing.
Quite a lot of pressure, isn't it? You think about it, if you're ever more concentrating, in one relationship manager, or like a global clients person or whoever it might be. Likewise, if you're the client and you've got to manage all those different relationships, and now your parent company says, due to carbon footprint, etc., only one person's allowed to go to the conference. It's kind of on you to bump into potentially any one of your business partners at the conference, and to be able to very quickly figure out which deals are we on with them again, and how much. And
well, you see, I think if you look at the particularly kind of the people who hold the reinsurance buyer position, head of outwards reinsurance or reinsurance placements, various different titles. But you often see them kind of a little bit wide-eyed, being kind of dragged around by a horde of brokers that are looking after them, and Aon will have them for a day, and GC will have them the next day, and I don't think they're in very much control over their diet. They certainly don't look in control at the time. I'm sure in meetings they're very professional and in control and calm and poised, but when they're moving between them, it's a whirlwind. It's a little bit of a...
You probably feel like either a very elderly or very young relative who's meeting someone they haven't seen for like decades. You remember this person. They write this part of your whatever treaty with a 5% share, and you're like, oh yes, yeah. You came to my christening, right? Who knows, right?
It's interesting if we think about those broader like group and company-wide relationships, and you think about where the conferences sit geographically. Do you think that will have an impact on how companies deploy them? So if you have, like, a lot of times reinsurance gets centralized, but they still might want to go. They still might have parts of their business in the United States or parts of their business across Asia are similar, even if they buy all the reinsurance out of Europe. How do you think companies will begin to think about where they send and where they attend conferences based on the centralization of that, and knowing that the relationships around like that group level conversation, but knowing you still want to have the regional conversations?
That's a good question. I think Monte Carlo's always been the big one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always where those kind of group-wide conversations will happen. It's the most logical place for it to happen. It's fairly central if you look at, you know, transport routes around the world, for, you know, most people to get to.
Especially if you have a helicopter. So.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking about the kind of macro journey rather than specifically the trip to Monte Carlo. Those last 40 miles.
The last little bit.
But so APCIA, for example, you know, massively important for US regional carriers. Huge broker attendance, huge amount of effort put in by, again, top 5 brokers predominantly, that kind of lead and drive all of the events and activities there. There is like like plenary sessions, but they're not well attended at all. They're kind of a bit of a sideshow to the you know, speed dating of meeting after meeting after meeting that happens there. But you're not seeing big global deals done by big global carriers at that particular event. Cirque is pretty similar, you know, maybe with the exception of the big 3 Japanese companies. And yeah, I think those kind of defer to Monte Carlo, and that will probably continue to be the case.
So it might be, it reminds me of something like OKRs or something, right? Like Monte Carlo sets the high level of objectives you're trying to achieve, and then all the smaller regional ones are like carving out, you're going to try to achieve this to drive our broader company-wide objective, right? It's sort of pointing out and carving out what they're going to try to do at those smaller, more regional ones to serve the bigger agenda. I
like the idea that somebody's fully writing this down, listening to this and being like, oh, that's the team meeting on Monday sorted.
Yeah, exactly.
Make an hour one of those.
But that might be the way these things play out, is they work, like right now they're broadly independent, although there's buyers who go to all of them and people like us who go to all of them. But it might evolve to be something where they serve kind of a collective whole. If you're the larger the world carrier, you sort of look at it as the utilization of those conferences as a way to sort of drive home how do we achieve the company-wide objective, but also the objectives in the US or in Asia or in sort of across Europe, independently of the bigger mission.
Well, you touched on something there, which is kind of the involvement of vendors in these conferences, and I think that is changing as well, and it's changing kind of some of the setup and the way the conferences pan out. I think previously in past years it has always been all about the deals being done, and I think even 3 years ago, when we were going to some of these, we were kind of very timidly sending emails in kind of the 6 weeks leading up, saying, look, I know you're not here to see us. I know that you're here to do deals, but would you mind, you know, taking 30 minutes out? And we were over the moon. People were really generous with their time. People wanted to talk about what we were doing in the industry, but that wasn't like the purpose of them being there. I think we're seeing actually now that innovation and platforms and ways that this industry can do what it does better and can do what it does more efficiently is becoming more of a permanent agenda item. And so we're seeing, you know, events by Big Four consultancy firms that are very, very focused around what does the technological future of the reinsurance industry look at. We're seeing these things become a solid part of the agenda. We're seeing people who head up large innovation units attending these conferences and having full calendars during these conferences, which previously would never have happened. They're becoming places where the entire industry, including its ancillary suppliers and people that support the technology and the infrastructure behind the industry, are also much more involved than I think they previously were.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense with these topics again being nowadays an irremovable part of the half-yearly reports they would have just published, or the annual reports they're about to write, testing the narrative that they're going to present to their shareholders on AI and all sorts. Yeah. It's quite an important part of this.
Like the brokers on their own, they're coming out with 9-10 figure numbers in terms of what their investment into technology is going to be in shareholder reports. You can't make those kind of statements and then go back to the traditional way of doing things when you're at these market events where a decent proportion of the attendees of these events are journalists, and they go there to promote things and to give interviews and create a market narrative around their business. But there's also a microscope on what's said, and there's a lot of analysis and comment and editorial work that's done after the event to kind of, actually hold people to account on following through on what they say.
Yeah, completely.
Well, it's almost time to get in then. Hopefully people are excited about conference season following this, because it's coming up close. So if we're at the conferences, say hi to us. Come to say hi to the podcast. Come say hi to Tom and to Ben and to me. It's going to be a good few months.
Yeah, we'll see people there.
See you guys there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Reinsurance Podcast. If you enjoyed our show, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review to let us know how we're doing, preferably 5 stars. For more insights and updates, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at supercede.com/podcasts. You'll find the links in the show notes.